The revolt of Boudicca, which broke out in Britain, is one of the most prominent examples of liberation revolts that regularly covered recently conquered territories by the Romans. Its counterparts were the revolts of Sacrovir and Floris in Gaul, Arminius in Germany, and many others. The main feature of the revolt in Britain compared to other such conflicts was that its leader was a woman. Britain was first opened to the Romans by Caesar. He undertook 2 military expeditions to the island, which generally ended without any result for him. In Britain he did not find the riches he expected to find there, and the locals offered fierce resistance to the Romans. In addition, the Roman fleet, unaccustomed to sailing in the ocean, was badly damaged by a storm. Having received news of the unrest in Gaul, Caesar left the island, satisfied with the nominal subordination of the leaders of the coastal communities and the receipt of tribute. Caesar's heir and successor Augustus wanted to undertake a campaign in Britain, but each time was forced to postpone them because of more pressing problems. An additional deterrent was the high cost of such an enterprise with little hope of large military booty. In 43, Emperor Claudius decided to undertake an invasion of Britain. The official aim of the expedition was to restore to the throne the king of the Atrebates, Barca, who had appealed to Rome for support and had been ousted by his enemies, the Catubulonian chieftains Togodumnus and Caratacus. For this purpose 4 legions were engaged, accompanied by a corresponding number of auxiliary detachments, totaling 45,000 men. The general command was to be exercised by Aulus Plautius. The Romans landed unhindered at Rhodopae and moved deep into the island. In battle on the Medway River they defeated the militia of the Britons gathered here, commanded by Togodumnus fell on the battlefield. When the legions crossed the Thames, the Emperor Claudius himself arrived at the theater of war. In his presence, the legions again defeated the Britons and stormed Camalodun, the capital of the Catubulons. After this Claudius returned to Rome, where he made a triumph over Britannia. Relying on the captured in 43 bridgehead, the Romans continued the conquest of the island. The future Emperor Vespasian fought for 2 years against the Durotrigi and the Dobuns, who lived on the territory of modern Dorset. During the successful campaign, all of Cornwall was conquered by Roman arms. The successor of Aulus Plautius, who took the post of commander-in-chief Publius Astorius Scapula, fought against the Iceni tribe, who lived in what is now Norfolk. Having defeated them, he did not deprive the Iceni of their freedom, but contented himself with proclaiming the leader of the pro-Roman party, Persuaga, as king. The Iceni were subsequently considered Roman allies and assisted Astorius Scapula during the large-scale campaign he launched to conquer Wales. The main opponents of the Romans here were the tribes of the Ordovician and Silurians, who were encouraged to fight by Caratacus, who had fled to them. The Britons launched a full-scale guerrilla war. Avoiding major battles, their detachments suddenly struck and immediately retreated into impassable forests and swamps. This tactic nullified the Roman efforts. In 51, Caratacus finally dared to enter the decisive battle at Sar Caradoc on the territory of modern Shropshire. The numbers of his army are unknown. The Britons were defeated, most of them dead. Caratacus again managed to escape, but his wife and children were captured. He tried to seek refuge in the north, but was extradited to the Romans by the queen of the Brigantes, Cartimandua. The following year, Astorius Scapula died. He was succeeded in office by Aulus Didius Gallus, who followed a cautious policy. He preferred to lay out roads and build fortified camps. In 57, Emperor Nero, needing victory reports, sent Didius Gallus into retirement, replacing him with the famous military commander Quintus Veranius Nepotus. On his arrival in Britain, preparations for a new campaign against the Silurians began immediately, in the midst of which the governor died suddenly. He was succeeded by the ambitious Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, who also had a reputation as a good military leader. During the next 2 years, he managed to inflict a number of defeats on the Britons and move the theater of war further to the northwest. 2 decades have passed since the Romans invaded Britain. During this time, a large part of the island submitted to Roman rule. The eastern and southeastern parts of it retained nominal freedom under the rule of dependent local rulers. In what is now West Sussex were the domains of the king of the Atrebates, Cogidubnus. North of the Thames, the king of the Iceni, Persuagus, ruled in Norfolk. Both were considered Roman allies. Their subjects retained their own laws and were exempt from paying taxes. The central and western parts of the island were part of the Roman province. These lands were considered the property of Rome by right of conquest, and the local inhabitants had to pay taxes and fulfill various duties for their use. The masters here were Roman military and civil officials, who allowed themselves monstrous abuses of power. In 60 A.D., Presutag, king of the Iceni, died and bequeathed his possessions to the emperor. By doing so, he hoped to protect his kingdom and family from violence. But the opposite happened. The emperor did not appoint a new king of the Iceni, but incorporated their lands into the Roman province. Extortion by the military and abuses by the authorities began immediately. The imperial procurator Cad Decianus was especially dashing. Thus, he decided to recover from the Iceni 10 million denarii for the gifts given to them still Claudius. The whole sum was to be paid at once, in silver denarii. Collecting the cash caused the Iceni some difficulty. All the property of the royal family was sold off at auction. The king's widow Boudica was whipped, and the daughters were dishonored by the centurions. The story was widely publicized and provoked the indignation of the Iceni. The flames of rebellion flared up. Boudica skillfully fanned the flames of rebellion. Riding in a chariot, accompanied by both her daughters, she traveled around the lands of her neighbors, urging them to join the rebellion. The rebels struck first at Camalodun, the symbol of the hated Roman rule. The city was still unfortified, and the Britons thought that it would be easy to capture it. Since the governor Suetonius Paulinus and his troops were far away at the time, the veterans turned to the procurator for help at the first sign of danger. The latter was able to send them only 200 soldiers for protection, believing the danger to be exaggerated. In fact, the Romans greatly underestimated the strength of the rebels. Boudica was able to summon almost 120,000 men under her banner. These forces encircled the colony from all sides, so that its inhabitants did not even have time to send their families away. The attack was sudden and deadly. Those who were not killed immediately barricaded themselves in the temple, where, together with the soldiers sent by the procurator, they kept the siege for 2 more days. Due to the enormous superiority of the forces of the attackers, the defenses were eventually broken through, the temple was set on fire, and all those who were there were killed. When the clouds were just beginning to thicken over the inhabitants of Camalodun, Quintus Petilius Ceriolus came to the aid of the besieged with his troops. On the way he fell into an ambush set for him and suffered such a defeat that, abandoning the infantry on the battlefield, saved only himself with few riders. After his defeat, Camalodun was doomed. The soldiers in Linda, together with their commander, locked themselves in the camp and sat in a tight siege of the Britons until the end of the events described. The governor of the province Suetonius Paulinus with the main military forces at this time campaigned against the inhabitants of the island of Mona, Anglesey. He managed to cross to the island, which was a major religious center of Druidism, and cut down the sacred groves of the Britons. When he received news of a rebellion in the province, he immediately broke off the campaign on the island and through the still unpeopled territory, accompanied by only a few warriors, rushed to the provincial capital of Londinia, London. The newly founded city had by then already become a major economic center with a large population, mostly consisting of merchants, colonists, retired veterans and their families. They were all anxiously awaiting the arrival of the rebels and greeted the viceroy as a deliverer. After assessing the situation, Suetonius Paulinus realized that his forces were insufficient to defend the city. He invited the assembled inhabitants to leave their homes and join his army. Neither the pleas nor the tears of the citizens shook his resolve. Some of the inhabitants followed his advice, and those who remained in the city were slaughtered by the Britons who soon arrived. The same fate befell Verulamium, Street, Albans, and other urban settlements. In all, about 70,000 Romans and their allies died in the course of the revolt. The perpetrator of these disasters, Cadicianus, traveled by ship to Gaul, from where he wrote to the emperor that the province was lost and its garrison perished. Meanwhile, Suetonius Paulinus, leading a column of settlers, joined the troops advancing towards him. The Roman troops numbered no more than 10,000 men. Seeing that supplies are running low, and pursuers breathing down his back, Suetonius Paulinus decided to try his luck in a decisive battle. The exact location of the battlefield is still unknown. It was probably somewhere between Londinium and Viroconium, modern-day Wroxeter, on Watling Street, the main road of Roman Britain. The battlefield was a narrow gorge, backed and flanked by woodland. Many times inferior to the rebels, Suetonius Paulinus put the soldiers in tightly closed ranks with their backs to the woods, facing the enemy. The cavalry was built on the flanks, the infantry in the center. The Britons were built for battle in wedges, infantry against infantry, chariots against cavalry. Before the battle, both commanders addressed a speech to their soldiers, appealing to their courage. In the course of the battle, the discipline and armament of the legions took precedence over the numerical strength and mad courage of the Britons. An eloquent description of the battle has been preserved. At first the legion, without moving from its place, stood behind the gully that replaced its fortification, but, having released all its darts at the enemies approaching within striking distance, rushed at them in battle order. Equally swift was the onslaught of the soldiers of the auxiliary troops, and the horsemen with lances rushed at the enemy, crushing those who blocked their way and resisted. The rest of the enemy then fled, but were hindered by the wagons which had been placed everywhere and were clogging the passage. The legionaries exterminated the enemy, not sparing the women, and the corpses of horses pierced with darts and spears were added to the piles of human bodies. The battle lasted most of the day. Only at sunset did the Romans triumph over the fiercely fought enemies. About 80,000 Britons fell on the battlefield. Many people were captured. A significant part of the rebels were scattered and hid in the forests, but they were prevented from gathering their forces by the sudden death of Boudicca. It remains unknown whether it was voluntary. It is believed that the queen took poison, unable to accept defeat. Britons bitterly mourned her and arranged a lavish funeral for the deceased, but, after the death of Boudicca, deciding that now they really defeated, finally scattered to their homes. Suetonius Paulinus, having been victorious, replenished his army with detachments transferred from Germany, and then began to suppress the last pockets of resistance. In doing so, he showed such cruelty to the defeated that the Emperor Nero, wary of how the rebellion would not break out again, considered it a good thing to recall him to Rome and shower him with awards for the victory.